You guys are, yeah. And I mean, I don't know, maybe I'll.
I feel like this is the first time I've seen
Is the mic? No, it's.
And we can share this copy.
I know it's. I think it's probably. It was just Rosh Hashanah, and so I did go to for the first time in person services at synagogue, um, and it was really weird. Everybody was masked though. I'm for this. I'm not gonna wear my mask, but I'm not next week, the weekend after. I'm my sister's getting married, and I'm officiating the wedding, so I'm like I cannot get sick. Right. Yeah, why don't you sit up here to start with, since
So I got
you.
some.
Okay, and we'll just try to wing it.
Yeah, it's gonna be great. I'm gonna grab my notebook just in case people ask me questions.
All right. How do I turn? Well, maybe it's on. Oh, okay.
So if we have a moderator that can admit people, because they can't be on the screen presenting, does that make sense?
Yes.
If you want to get started,
Okay, is the microphone on?
this one's on, and I'll bring you up volume-wise. So just let them know to put it on, or we can turn it on now.
Okay.
Station then, yeah.
Good morning, everyone. We're just gonna give our tech person a few more minutes to finish admitting people into the meeting. We're both on Zoom today as well as in person. It looks like we have a lot of people joining remotely. Yeah. And they set up the meeting, so you have to admit people. And so anyway, it's a bit of a challenge for him to be both admitting people and managing the PowerPoint. Do you think we can go ahead and get started? Have you admitted most people? Okay, great. Well, good morning, everybody. And welcome. I'm Andrea Sanchez, and I'm the Deputy Director at HTC. And it's truly a new season. It's the first rain of autumn today, which was really lovely in my opinion. And this is the first time that we've all been together in 3 years, and it's really wonderful to see so many of your faces. And really great that we're able to also do this via Zoom. So it's kind of my first attempt at a hybrid model. At HTC, we often talk about our unique and powerful position to see projects from across the state that use all types of funding sources. And we get to see those projects from infancy through construction, through lease up and stabilization and initial operations. And it's through that unique lens that this session today was born. Over the past year, we have watched a number of projects in our office that are working to implement these new forms of rental assistance. And the two we're going to talk about today and really focus on from a project-based perspective is the Metro SHS funding, as well as the OHCS PSH rental assistance. And I just want to take a minute to acknowledge how incredible it is for us in this state to have access to this resource to be able to serve the citizens of Oregon that are the most vulnerable. And like any new program, there are challenges that we have faced and successes when implementing this new form of rental assistance. So our intention for today's session is to learn a bit more about these sources of rental assistance, and we have a great panel put together, and to share our learnings with one another. We're not going to solve all the problems, but we all in this room have probably either attempted or are trying to use one of these resources, and the point for today is to really have a conversational session, to answer questions, and to learn from one another. I'm sure that many of you attending today's session can add to this collective learning. And we will also have time at the end for questions and answers. So then I'm just going to go ahead. If you go to the next slide, please. Next slide. And I'm going to have our panelists introduce themselves. We've got some up here and some at this table. And then also to let you all know that one of our panelists from Metro was unfortunately in an accident and not able to attend today. So we wish her well and would appreciate your patience with us because our expert panelist on the Metro rental assistance is not here today. So between myself and Devin Ellen, who works at Clackamas County, we're going to kind of try to tag team and answer basic high-level questions. So I'll let you start.
All right. Hi. Good morning, everyone. My name is Dana Schultz. I am the Permanent Supportive Housing, or PSH, Program Manager at Oregon Housing and Community Services.
Hello, I'm Amy Cole, the State Development Resources Manager at Oregon Housing and Community Services.
Hi, everyone. I'm Devin Ellen. I'm the Housing Director with the Housing Authority of Clackamas County.
I'm Chris Bendix, Project Developer with Mercy Housing Northwest.
I'm Rachel B. Dew, Senior Relationship Manager at NOAA.
Good morning. I'm Ann Malone with US Bancorp CDC, and I am representing the investor perspective.
Thanks, everybody. Okay, so we're going to get started with doing some brief context around the Metro ARLA program. And this is, of course, the one that between Devin and I, we're going to a little bit winging it here. But if you could go to the next slide, please. Thanks. Sorry, you deserve a medal here. You're admitting people, managing the camera. All right. So how this measure or how this rental assistance was approved is through a measure 2610, and it was passed by the voters in May of 2020 for a 10-year period. And so this particular rental assistance is available to projects located in the metro area. So Clackamas County, Multnomah County, and Washington County. The primary source for this rental assistance are taxes. It's a personal income tax as well as a business income tax. So that's how these funds are generated. And I believe for the tax year 2021 is the first year that the taxes were actually collected, the revenue. So how do you access this rental assistance? Devin, do you want to talk a little bit about, at least with Clackamas County, how developers can access it?
Sure. So my understanding is that folks applied through a Tri-County RFP to become basically ARLA certified firms that were able to then apply for rental assistance on specific projects.
And it's also true that Metro collects the revenue source, and then it's the implementation is done on a county by county system.
That's correct. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Can you also speak to a little bit about tenant eligibility and payment standard?
Sure, yeah. So there are two populations that are eligible. What they call population A, which represents 75% of the total allocation, and then population B. Population A is folks that are considered chronically homeless. It's a little bit broader than the HUD definition of chronically homeless. And it's there's an income restriction. So folks in population A need to have incomes at or below 30% AMI. And then population B, there's currently no income restrictions on population B. So it can be folks that are currently homeless that don't qualify for population A, or folks that are also at risk of homeless or doubled up, sleeping on couches. And then in terms of the payment standard, that's really where I was hoping Valeria would be able to weigh in, because I'm not sure if it is set by jurisdiction. I know that some of the payment standards that the Housing Authority of Clackamas County have issued are higher than the 60 to 80% AMI. So I don't know if something's changed since then, so we'll have to follow up on that.
Yeah, and I can say also from where we sit at HDC is that we have also seen some of the ARLA contracts look different county by county and even within the same county. So it does seem like this is an important piece to get clarification on. And it also seems to be an evolving piece. Maybe we should just take a minute to, is anyone in the audience have experience with the payment standard using ARLA and how it was implemented on your project? No, okay. All right, so, oh yeah. So the county then, Joe's, is saying, I see. 60% AMI. Okay. And maybe I'll just take a minute to shout out Travis, who just recently joined HDC. I think, is this 1 week today, Travis? As our new director of real estate development. It's really great to have him on board. Yeah. I'm very happy. Okay, so let's move on. Next slide. And I'm going to turn it over to Amy and Dana, who are going to talk a little bit about the statewide OHCS PSH rental assistance program.
All right, good morning again. I'm going to take this slide and then Dana will add in everything that needs to be added. So the first, how is it funded? The PSH Permanent Supportive Housing Rent Assistance is funded by the Oregon legislature, and it is general fund dollars, so very flexible dollars. We put a request in each biennium in preparation for the biennial budget for new assistance, and then assistance that has been funded in past years is in the state current service level budget. People can access, or developers, teams can access these resources through participation in the Oregon Supportive Housing Institute. We host one of those per year at this point. Another way is that developers can submit an application through a couple of our other fund offerings. We've made these resources available through our 9% NOFA process, as well as our veterans and small project NOFAs. We do that if we have enough resources after the PSH NOFA has been funded. Let's see. Next, I'll talk a little bit about tenant eligibility. We have our rent set at 60, our rent assistance set at 60% AMI, and that's also our income limit as well. Although we know everybody who's using these resources is well under 60% AMI. So the way that tenants come to the units is that they need to be referred through a local and approved OHCS coordinated entry system, which uses either the HUD definition or a local definition of chronically homeless. So payment standard, as we said before, we have a maximum of 60% AMI for the payment standard, and that is revised each year as we get the HUD 60% AMI limits. Our contract length is 15 years, and it is eligible for renewal as long as the funds are still there, which we expect them to be. Let's see. Did I miss anything? I think I got everything. So I'm going to hand it off to Dana.
Yeah, so I can provide some PSH rental assistance program updates as we've kind of been moving along for the last year, pretty newly on the program. So in recent biennia, we've requested $50 million from the legislature to fund the development capital portion of our PSH projects. We are asking for $75 million, so a $25 million increase in the next biennia. And we're also increasing our ask from, we call our rental assistance, and we also fund services for the PSH program, and we call them slots when we talk to the legislature, so they think of them as a unit. It's basically another way to say like funding for a PSH unit. We've asked for 400 slots of rental assistance in the past, and this year we're requesting 500 slots. So we're definitely upping the ante because we can see the need out there, and it is working well for projects. We've funded 24 projects through the PSH program in total. So that's about 680 units. 19 of these projects are utilizing the PSH rental assistance. So that's 487 units who currently have the rental assistance funding attached to their PSH units. As you know, it takes a while to build buildings. So we've only got 5 projects operating at this moment. 2 of those projects are utilizing the project-based rental assistance. So that's 36 units that are currently online, and 30 are actively occupied and receiving rental assistance on a monthly basis at that 60% AMI amount based on the county in which the project's in. But by the end of the biennium, so July 23, we should have 8 PSH projects online, 5 using our rental assistance. So we should see 153 units of our PSH rental assistance up and running, moving and shaking, and we're learning every day about how to make it better. And there's projects in Ontario, a couple in Portland, and one in Ashland who are using the rental assistance. And so, like Amy said, how do folks access the funding? The biggest piece is through our NOFAs, through our releases for requests for funding applications. We release our PSH NOFA, so the NOFA that Supportive Housing Institute participants can access rental assistance, and then our other PSH funding through that NOFA. We released the PSH NOFA in early 2023. So January 2023 is probably around when that one will come out. And if you want to get involved in the Supportive Housing Institute to be able to access that NOFA, we release requests for applications to bring your PSH team to the Institute. We'll release those around February of 2023, so once a year. Yeah, I think those are the only updates I have.
Great, thank you. Yeah. Wait, you know what? I had one question. Is it true, and I know the 9% round is changing this year, but there was an opportunity to access the PSH rental assistance through last year's 9% NOFA? And is that projected to also happen in the fall 23 NOFA?
Yeah, we've attached the rental assistance and services funding portion of our PSH dollars to the 9% NOFA, the veterans and small projects NOFA, like Amy said. Um, I I don't know if it's not 100% sure they'll be there next year, but we are trying to make it so because it is another way to access those resources without having getting a seat in the institute. And it's another way sometimes that type of development funding works better for projects than the PSH funding. So we want to make it available. It's our intent.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Okay, so I think we're gonna, because we're limited on chairs here. Oh, yes, thanks. Hey, Peter.
If you got qualified for the PSH funding through the 9% NOFA, they indicated in the NOFA that you would also be expected to participate in the institute. Can you just elaborate a little on how that works?
Sure, yeah. So if you are awarded, if you request the rental assistance and or the services funding through, say, the 9% NOFA, and your team or your developer has not gone through the institute, we generally ask those teams to participate in the next institute. We hold a slot in the next year. Yeah. Go ahead in the back. Hi. Mhm. Yeah, that's a great question. Okay, so from OHCS, yes, that's definitely on our top list of to-dos. We recently surveyed currently funded PSH projects about kind of anticipated increased needs, what that percentage should look like. We're also working with our Technical Assistance Partners Corporation for Supportive Housing, who are doing a lot of studies currently on what those operation costs really are. We recognize that $10,000 is not going to cut it every year. And so we've got to figure out, one, what that general increase is in the current service level, like what we can do annually percentage wise, and then also what that number, that $10,000 per unit per year should actually be, working with CSH to get that more concrete, higher number. I don't know, do you know kind of when we can expect some movement on that?
No, we don't. Currently, we don't have the information. We're actively working on trying to get all this information together, and then we'll figure it. We'll go from there. This is the first time that we have been able to consider increasing it, or that it has sort of come up as we're doing planning for the program. So we appreciate your patience and partnership, and just know that we're actively working on it and hope to have more information soon.
Can we answer anything about the metro? I can't answer about the service.
I can't.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Jillian. Oh, but maybe Travis can. Oh, another question. Okay. And I was getting some cues from AV person, and I believe you were telling me to repeat the question. Okay. So for those of you at home, the question that Jillian asked is, what is the plan, or has OHCS considered increasing the $10,000 per unit subsidy cap for PSH services, given cost of living adjustments, and just that services are costing more and more? And I think also, which I know I've heard both you and Amy talk about, is just now that there's actually units that are operating, I think you guys are getting a better feel for what it actually costs. $10,000 was based on your best guess, and now presumably there's actuals out there. So Travis, you have another question. So the question is around the OHCS PSH rental assistance contract length. Question from the audience is recollecting that it was 10 years at one point, and now it's 15 years. So just wanting to understand the evolution around that shift.
As far as we know, it hasn't changed. It's always been intended to be 15 years, or at least the contract language has always read that way since we have started signing contracts. So thank you.
Any other questions? Yes.
We found in terms of working in Ontario,
Okay.
we have one of the projects that actually has tenants using rental assistance. That as a developer, we've done a lot to kind of collaboratively stand up a coordinated entry system and service partners. It's actually the first go at any kind of PSH housing in that Mount Huron area. And I'm wondering, OHCS has been rolling out a lot of kind of support and technical assistance dollars and help. I'm wondering if any of that is pointed towards helping to stand up coordinated entry systems in other rural areas that developers can maybe plug into as opposed to having to build at the same time as they're building it.
So the question is around coordinated entry systems in rural Oregon. And this particular developer has basically had to build the coordinated entry system at the same time as developing the project. And so wondering if OHCS has technical assistance dollars to help build these coordinated entry systems in rural Oregon.
Yeah, that's a great question, Clayton. And honestly, kudos to your project. You guys are doing so awesome. But yeah, I think we knew when we set the coordinated entry, I guess, rule, if you will, for PSH, that would be a tricky situation for a lot of rural areas, especially if their, continuum of care or their coordinated entry process is not, getting close to being up and running. And so I can't really speak like formally on this, but I know that our agency has invested in coordinated entry internally, and we do have a large coordinated entry team. And we are absolutely able to provide resources, both financially and, technically, like training to projects that need that setup. I don't think we've done a great job on making that super known, and it's not a formal process or a formal training, but it's definitely something to think about. We have the resources to help when those questions come up, and we can, deliver those resources and help teams figure that process out. We also can be a little flexible if it's not an option for that community. We can help them figure out a referral process that is equitable and reaching the folks who need PSH the most. So yeah, it's a yes and no. We have the resources. We could definitely offer that assistance, but we don't have a formal approach to it yet. But it's something that I should definitely chew on.
Jonathan?
Following up on Travis's question a little. The local money, the metro money is actually 10-year levy.
Yeah.
So can anybody speak or 7-year focus? This is unfair. But the contract term for the PSA project is
I think I can probably answer that question at the highest level. And then I think, Jonathan, we're going to get to some case studies where we can talk about how that challenge is being met by different developers. So it's my understanding that, as an example, if you have a project that has the Arla rental assistance and you sign the contract, let's say in 2024, because the sunset date is 2030, your contract length is 6 years. So the contract length is tied to the sunset date. And I think this is, one of the key challenges. And it means that if you don't do a project until 2028, your contract length is 2 years. So that's and I think, it's unfortunate Metro is not here, but I feel like I can say with confidence that they're very aware of this problem. And I think there's an Arla work group. Maybe you attend it, Jonathan. I don't know. But it seems as if that this is rising to the top for them. Do you have anything to add on that?
I would just add that all of the contracts that we've issued thus far have, subject to renewal of the measure. So the terms extended, subject to renewal.
Okay. And I will say one other thing without Valeria here, that it seems to me in preparing for this presentation that every county is really implementing in a different way. So I don't know if there's anyone here from Washington County, but it really feels like their focus has been on tenant basing these vouchers opposed to project basing these voucher types. And that's for a number of different reasons, including some of the underwriting challenges that we're about to speak to. I think Clackamas County, how many project-based contracts do you have?
Just one.
Just one.
Yeah.
And we'll hear about that later. And I know for sure of one in Multnomah County that HDC worked on, that we'll also talk about a little bit later. Okay. So we're going to do a little bit of switching here. Thank you so much, Devin, Amy, and Dana. And we're going to bring up our underwriting experts. Sure. Well, that's all right. Okay, you can go to the next slide. So we're going to shift gears a little bit and move away from what is this form of rental assistance to what are some of the underwriting challenges that are being faced. And so, Anne, I think I'm going to turn it over to you to just generally speak to what you need.
15-year contract is a beautiful thing. So if you can get that, thank you. Oregon does have amazing resources for PSH, and resources that you don't find often in other parts of the country. So you're way ahead in terms of meeting the needs of populations. You're working with the most difficult to house population. Residents, as you know, may have physical and mental limitations. They may have survived trauma. And it's a process of continuous learning based on who shows up at the property when you're leasing it up. And you should know it sometimes takes extra time. So your lease up assumptions, April's nodding, need to be conservative when you're looking at how long it will take to fill your building with your investor. I would say, talk early and often with your financing partners about your plan. You're really the experts in this work, and we follow your lead. So if you have a plan, you think you know who you're going to be serving, that is the most important thing. So we're going to follow your lead. New sources of subsidy are always challenging for investors and lenders. And the good news is that we're all on the same side. So we want to do good work. There are a lot of masterful developers that I see here in this room. Congratulations on the work you've done so far. But you should know that at the end of the day, all of the risk does accrue to the sponsor of the project. So the investor is not going to take the risk that the subsidy is going to be there. We're not really going to want to take the risk of a permanent loan, depending on who you're serving. And we're going to look carefully at all of your assumptions, what is in the contracts as far as escalations. And we are going to want to see your underwriting show if it's a declining DSCR, if you have debt, it needs to stay at 115 for all 15 years. If you have no hard debt, which is much preferred, sorry, then you need to be at a 105. So you want to say a few words before we talk more?
Yeah. So I am representing the permanent debt side of things. So I know it is really, really hard to have any sort of hard debt on PSH projects just because there are so many unknowns in terms of operating costs. So what we look for is actually what we consider a little bit more beautiful than a 15-year contract, a 20-year contract, because that is the length of our typical permanent loan, is preferable for us. However, we can work with different contract lengths, just adjusting the term of our loan. But like Anne said, I just want to echo, like, bringing all of that information forward early is the best way to set the underwriting for success and also the project for the long term. One thing that we look at really carefully when underwriting the permanent supportive housing is the operating expenses. As Anne mentioned, this population is hard to house, and it often incurs additional expenses in terms of repairs and maintenance and turns. So what we want to make sure is that, for the long term, the expense assumptions are set up for, a situation where the developer and sponsor are able to best support the people who are living in the units. And with that, I would also add that it's important to have a robust replacement reserve and operating reserve when we're looking at, the initial projections. One thing that we find really important is to recognize, especially, early on, that there are appropriate services, the wraparound services that are going to be provided to each of the individuals and families in those units. We're seeing more and more that people are recognizing that 24-hour access to care is, something that is actually needed at the properties. And so we want to make sure that, we're budgeting for that. And, like Anne said, it is difficult to have a hard debt payment every month with that, but we also at NOAA are mission driven and willing to work with a lot of different situations, and we can get creative and, just want to make sure that we are supporting the housing crisis in Oregon and, participating in providing housing for people who are desperately in need of it.
Rachel, are you able to give a range on what your per unit per year operating expenses, what you like to see in a project?
It's a little bit difficult to put a number on it because, larger projects, you can see a lower per unit operating expense per unit. But what we saw, I can say, with this 15-unit Douglas fir project that we are going to profile in a few minutes is per unit expenses, I believe they're around $7,000. And I would say that we did have a long conversation at committee that might be on the low side. So, just keep that in mind, especially as we're seeing more and more inflation, that number is going to increase a little bit in this environment as well.
Okay, thanks. And I just want to emphasize something that Anne raised about lease up. I feel like in my professional experience, I don't have a lot of years leasing up 100+ unit projects. So this is something, and I think this is newer in the industry, these large projects. And it is really taking a long time to lease up, even before you overlay the PSH component. So, Anne, are you recommending that in terms of negotiating like LOI and tax credit delivery schedule, that's something that you really want us to come to you early and often to be realistic about that schedule?
Yeah, absolutely. And it may, so our philosophy is that we'd 100% rather pay an upward adjuster than a downward adjuster. And for this type of project where cash developer fees might be very skinny to begin with, if you have a downward adjuster because your lease up assumptions were too aggressive, then nobody's happy.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would say be more conservative, even if it means you get a lower tax credit price up front. You will have that flexibility. I mean, flexibility here is the name of the game. It's flexibility in your contracts, flexibility in your services, flexibility in who you can work with on the service provision side, flexibility in AMIs kind of floating up and down depending on what's going on in the community. I mean, 15 years is a long time, and a lot can change in terms of people's needs. I wanted to talk a little bit about the operating subsidy and how we underwrite it. Is it in the partnership or is it out of the partnership? And we have looked at it both ways, and we have looked at it in sort of an in-between scenario. So when it's maybe PSH, I'll call it PSH light, if that's a thing, or if you have an outside contract for a service provider who's going to provide all services at your property, there may be a reasonable case of leaving the operating subsidy out of the limited partnership projections and looking at it just as real estate. That is going to depend on whether your funders are requiring a certain level of services. So if they are not requiring services at the property as part of the tax credit award or soft money award, then you could think about leaving it out. You know, on the other end of the spectrum, you put everything into the project, and that's when you start to see these very high operating expense loads. And that can have an impact on projections and underwriting also, really in terms of what is it going to cost to operate this project over the long term? Do we have operating expense coverage and flexibility to operate the project for such a long time?
I'll add to that as well a little bit on the underwriting side. In terms of the service dollars and the requirements to provide services, when they are in the tax credit application on the hard debt side, we also incorporate that into our underwriting. If there's no requirement, we can leave it out just like the equity investor. But I think one thing that's really important for a lender is that that there is a plan in the very unlikely event of foreclosure. So we just want to make sure that if there is a foreclosure situation, that either the service dollars continue to flow if we are required to continue to provide services to the property, or the alternative being that there is no services required and then the service dollars will not need to continue to flow. So that is one thing that, you know, we will be looking at usually, hopefully early, because if there needs to be some conversations around that, those usually take, you know, some creativity and a lot of collaboration.
Great, thanks.
Rachel, do you underwrite tenant-based vouchers?
We do not underwrite tenant-based vouchers. Yeah, we're only able to underwrite the project-based vouchers because since tenants have the ability to move in and out, we can't rely on that income for the long term.
Great. All right. Does anybody have any questions for our financing partners before we move into case studies? Yes, Jillian.
requiring growth above. So is that in the pro forma or not, right? Like what is required? What does that mean? So for NOAA, that means if it is in the tax credit application and the funds are awarded based on the promise that those services will be provided, then it's required. That aligns.
Okay. Any other questions for our financing partners? All right, so we're gonna go into our case studies. So you can stay up here. So I think Rachel and Chris, yeah, and you can stay or you can go back down, whatever you feel comfortable with. So you can go to the next slide. So Rachel, we're going to talk about Doug first. So I can introduce the project. This is a project. The sponsor is New Narrative, formerly known as Lukedorf. And it's a small project. It's 15 units. There are no tax credits in the project. It was an incredibly it's under construction right now. And it's one of those projects where I feel like almost my entire 5 years at HDC I've been working on. So it's been a difficult one. So yeah, I'll let you take it from there, from your perspective on how we had to get creative there.
Yeah. So as Andrea mentioned, this was an incredibly difficult underwriting process with a lot of collaboration and a lot of creativity that went into it. So this is a small development, 15 units, with the intent of providing housing for seriously mentally ill individuals and people experiencing chronic homelessness. The project-based vouchers are provided through Metro on this deal. And so there is an 8-year contract in place since the termination is 2030. So as Andrea mentioned, there is, risk with that. We have a loan that is longer than 8 years. And so we had to figure out a way where, the property and the sponsor could provide those services throughout the life of the loan without, having the risk of that contract going away because, in 2030, it's up to the voters. And as we know, no one can guarantee what the voters are going to do. So for this deal in particular, we were able to work with Multnomah County. And in this situation, the county was willing to provide a springing guarantee. So in the event that this is not continued through a vote and the contract terminates because it expires, then Multnomah County will come in and provide those service dollars for the project throughout the rest of the term of the loan. One thing that we negotiated that is a little bit more risk for the sponsor and a little bit sticky for the lender is that the guarantee is capped at the rent subsidy that was actually paid in the 12 months prior to the termination of the contract. So we would be looking at a situation where those contract dollars would not be increasing with the cost of living. So, that's something to keep in mind, a risk that we are willing to take. But it's something to consider as a developer when you're looking at doing this type of development and utilizing this type of rental assistance. Did I miss anything, Andrea?
I don't think so. I think, just getting to that collaborative piece, I feel like what was key to getting this project to work was rolling up our sleeves and having conversations about what do we need to get to yes, and building that framework about what is it that we all need to make this project work, and then beginning our negotiations from there. And there isn't someone here from Multnomah County, but they were also at the table to help understand what they felt was plausible to take to their superiors to get approved. So there's a lot, and I mean, it was months of working together. I feel like it's one of those deals where the actual closing was not that difficult relative to all of the work that happened to get us to that point where we were just literally going through the motions, the normal motions of closing. So
Yeah, and I will add that there were a lot of ideas thrown around. Oh, sorry. Yeah, sorry about that.
thank you.
Yeah, I will add that there were a lot of ideas thrown around during the collaboration process, including pre-funding, capitalizing a reserve for those those dollars that might be missed out on. And, in the end, that was thought to be not the right path for the majority of the working group. So, we were able to get to a point where we were all content with the outcome. But there were, like you said,
Yeah,
there was a lot of back and forth and a lot of ideas out there.
Yeah.
So I think that, just reiterating, if you have ideas, bring them to the table because they will be considered and they will be seriously listened to. We might not be able to, go that path forward, but, creativity is welcome.
Yeah, and I think in that creativity, correct me if I'm wrong, but we ended up with a 15-year term loan versus 20.
Correct.
That was another creative piece that we put together. And then the project also agreed to a smaller loan, sizing the permanent loan a little bit smaller than had originally been anticipated. All right, great. Thanks. Any questions on that particular project? Yes.
Oh, that's one that I don't know off the top of my head.
Yeah,
Sorry.
Same with me. I mean, it's definitely, it's a, I mean, it was overall, I will feel like with a small project, it ends up to be looking on a per unit basis more expensive just because you can't spread those costs. But I'm happy to get you that information if that would be helpful. You can afterwards, I can give you my email address. Jonathan, did I see? Mm-hmm. What's my take on it? It's a really great question. And when we were preparing for this panel, we talked a lot about some of these solutions in these various projects, what is replicable. I think on this project, because it's small and that the guarantee, the springing guarantee is therefore smaller, that could potentially make it more replicable versus a project that's larger and has a greater percentage share of PSH units that are using this rental assistance. And I also think that there is push to for voters to see that the money is getting out the door. And so there could have been also a sense of urgency there that here's a project that, but for us working this last deal point out, we could get under construction and serve this incredibly vulnerable population. So it's both. Yes, in the back. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh gosh. Things I should have, note to self, what you should brush up on before you come to the conference. And I'm not at my computer, so I could like quickly look at the performa. So the other sources on this are GHAP funds from OHCS that were awarded through a small project, NOFA. There is also FHLB in this project. There are numerous grant sources. So it's one of these, again, like a 15-unit project, you think, this can be easy. There's no LIHTC. It has 9 sources, I think, and it was among, the most complicated deals to negotiate. But the major ones are the OHCS and FHLB, and I believe a grant from Meyer Memorial Trust.
Yeah, and I will add that another deal that I worked on used home funds. And then Jonathan, back to your question about repeating the Multnomah County springing guarantee. Our understanding is they're open to the conversation.
That lit people's eyes up a little bit. Okay, any other questions on this Douglas Fir Apartments? Okay, we'll go to our next case study. Next slide, please. So Chris, I'll let you introduce your project.
Thank you. Yeah, so this is Mercy Housing Northwest's first project in Oregon. We're excited to partner with the Sisters of the Holy Names to develop a 100-unit family housing property in Lake Oswego. So it's a mix of 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units, and we have 40% of units supported by the subsidy contract for population B that Devin was talking about earlier. So families at risk or on the verge of homelessness. So not quite the full what we would normally think of as PSH in terms of the level of intensity of services, but still certainly families in need. We explored a lot of different things. With Devin, we started talking about how to problem solve for this probably a year ago, and we closed 3 weeks ago on all the financing. So we went to Anne, we bounced ideas off of her, we shopped it around to a lot of different people. What we ended up doing, the fundamental challenge, like we've talked about already, is this difference between the term of the permanent loan and the term of the SHS funding, which ends at the end of 2030. So how do we bridge that? So we looked at, could the housing authority set aside a reserve equal to the amount of money that we would get from 2030 to the end of the loan term? That ended up not being workable. We looked at, do we have a second layer of debt that is just being paid off over those 8 years? How much can that get us? And how much does that move us towards closing the gap? What we ended up doing was working with all the funders, OHCS, Metro, to allow provisional language in the regulating agreements that say, we will regulate your property at 30% and 60% AMI per our LIFT and bond applications, provided you have this subsidy source to help you make your payments. And in the event that there are no subsidy sources available, we will allow you to float those units up to 60% AMI. We don't want to do that. We don't intend to do that. And we will do everything that we can to avoid doing that. But having that option allowed us to underwrite the project to 100% of the units at 60% AMI starting in 2031. And we sized our loan off of that. So it was a little bit complicated, obviously, but at the end of the day, that was the way that we could leverage the resource to maximize the amount of debt that we could bring onto the project, so that we could leave other resources available to other projects that needed it more. So it was a little bit of an exercise in lots of communicating with Devin, mostly, to figure out what we could do, and then working with our lender and investor to come up with a solution that would get them comfortable with the underwriting as well.
And is it true your payment standard also falls outside of, I guess, that 60 to 80% AMI range that I think is the again, without Metro here, but that's generally, I think, what they're saying.
Right. We have FMR, HUD FMR voucher payments.
So just another one of those standards that I think, every project is a little bit different, and that is definitely something unique to this project.
Yep.
All right. Devin, did you have anything to add on that? Okay. So it's a really complicated way to structure the project. Are there any questions about that? Okay, Travis.
I can speak to that a little bit. So like how do we transition if in the unlikely and really unfortunate event that we can't come up with anything else and we have to transition those units from 30% to 60%, what do we do? The way that we ended up approaching it was we went to the lender in KeyBank in this case and said, how can we get everybody comfortable with this? And so what we ended up doing was we said, okay, we'll set aside a reserve and we'll capitalize it up front, and it will be there waiting for us if we need to use it as units turn over naturally. So we don't want to push people out. And if we don't need it, then at the end of the end of 2030, when the program hopefully gets renewed, then the reserve gets released back to us and we can put it in the operating or replacement reserves. Yeah, it's similar to like a lease-up reserve. Yeah, exactly. And it's basically there to make sure that we can still cover our permanent debt payments as the subsidy source runs out.
Can you give an order of magnitude? I'm putting you on the spot now about numbers.
It was about 160,000 for a 100-unit project.
Okay, and I know we've got multiple hands. Jonathan, I think you had your hand up before. Oh, okay. And so there was
The reserve that we explored it. It wasn't palatable for the lender. The lender for this particular project isn't here, so I don't know, but it was a condition of closing the permanent loan. It was also a Freddie Mac perm loan, so that added some layers of fun, but that probably restricted some of their options a little bit.
And Chris, on this deal, your perm lender and your investor are the same. It's KeyBank.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, somebody else. Yes.
Right. Yep. Correct. But forecasted the 60% AMR escalating 2% per year up to 2031. So that was our underwriting amount.
Other questions? All right, I think another thing that we talked about is replicability for this particular structure as well. And I think where we landed is that Mercy Housing is a large organization, and that likely contributed to the ability to make this structure work. So it's maybe perhaps less palatable, less likely for a smaller CDC that doesn't have as large of a portfolio and as large of a balance sheet. So, okay, we'll go to our final case study, which is Sequoia Crossings, and the sponsor is Salem Housing Authority, and Dana and I are going to tag team a little bit on this one. So this project, the Salem Housing Authority applied to the PSH Institute and was accepted, and at the end of the institute applied for PSH capital dollars. So it's PSH capital dollars with PSH service dollars and 4% low income housing tax credit, I believe. And I'm going to have Dana talk a little bit about that this one has two forms of rent assistance. And so, you know, what was that like from OHCS's perspective?
Yeah, I think just a little context. So I was actually a part of the Sequoia Crossing team when they were in the Institute. So when we were kind of talking about how this was going to work, and like Andrea said, it was from the Salem Housing Authority in partnership with HDC and Mid-Willamette Valley Community Action Agency. And it was in a time where Marion and Polk counties were just starting to develop their continuum of care. They were just really kind of like, oh, right, we need to buckle down on housing and addressing homelessness and figure out how to drive more funding to this region around those issues. And they have done incredible work to kind of just flip it on its head and build a COC in a matter of 2 years and drive a lot of HUD funding to the area. And the Salem Housing Authority was like, okay, PSH is the next step. And, you know, walked into the Institute and was, you know, ready to start this journey. And so PSH serving chronically homeless adults, like true PSH, pulling from the most vulnerable, that top of the coordinated entry list is what they wanted to build into their housing continuum in Salem. And so that's what Sequoia Crossings was intended to be. It's 60 units of 1 and 2 bedroom PSH units. And I think, like what Andrea said, what makes it unique is that they utilize both the PSH rental assistance from OHCS, but also project-based vouchers from Salem, from the city of Salem, so the Section 8 PBVs. Originally, I think rental assistance from OHCS was the way we wanted to go because it's a little more flexible than the Section 8 vouchers in terms of who you have to screen out, and also when you're utilizing the HUD PBVs, you have to utilize a wait list, and it makes that true pull from coordinated entry a little more complicated. And what Sequoia Crossings wanted was that housing that's pulling from the top of the list, that's truly, you know, housing the folks that have been living outside for just absolutely way too long, and there hasn't been a housing that has been suitable to support them. And when you add a wait list into that process, it just kind of muddies the water, and you sometimes you miss the mark on who you're trying to get into housing. But obviously COVID happened and inflation and prices really, you know, went up. And so the investor for the project told HDC and Salem Housing Authority that their operating expenses needed to drastically increase if they were going to underwrite their project. And so project-based vouchers from the city of Salem increased because they pay more. They pay 80% AMI, I believe. OHCS PSH rental assistance pays 60% rent amounts. And so with the pairing of, I think it's 40 Salem PBVs and 20 OHCS vouchers, if you will, they've been able to fully fill the gap for their operating costs. And they're going to have long-term sustainability based on their projections. And they kind of get to meet in the middle on having some of those really kind of accessible units with what the PSH rental assistance can do about that. I call it the true pull from coordinated entry. And so it's a middle ground, meet in the middle to make the project come to life. And there's no doubt that the project-based vouchers from the city are going to be a great resource for that community and house folks experiencing chronic homelessness. It's just a little different approach. And yeah, so that's kind of like my take on the project from my perspective.
Yeah, and I think this one had fewer underwriting challenges because it had the more standard form of rental assistance, that's PBVs, for the 20-year contract. And it's a housing authority that, controls their ability to put vouchers into a project, unlike a non-housing authority project. So it really had fewer underwriting challenges. I think that this is a project that the Salem Housing Authority is really wanting to take their learnings and apply here. So they have another project called Redwood Crossings, which does not have tax credits, and it was also funded with the OHCS small gap NOFA monies and small project NOFA. Oh, it is Lift? Okay, it's Lift. But it has no tax credits. And they have learned so much about operating PSH. And so this is really in response to that particular project. And their executive director, Nicole, I know is speaking tomorrow at a session specifically on PSH operations. And it seems to go hand in hand with this topic today. So yes. Yeah, I did not, I want to own that, not the panelists. So no, I did not include any renderings, but if that is something that you're interested in, again, I can provide information to you via email. And they would all be renderings at this point. Yeah, any other questions or? Peter, I might call on you, not from a PSH perspective, but you've got a large project. I'm thinking about Y East, and I know there are it's not apples to apples, but in terms of that lease up, can you share with folks how long that took y'all to lease up? I can't remember, 150 plus units?
Yeah, certainly. Peter Featherston, HPDC, 175 units, and it was over a year to
Yeah.
And there were no designated PSH units. A lot of the population is probably qualified to be PSH. So there was, quite a bit of cycling of residents during the first year of operation.
Yeah. So it was interesting to see how you can hit your 100% initial occupancy, but then you can't hit the required like 93% or 95% from your perm lender because there's just so much turnover, more turnover than I feel like I had experienced happening during the entire lease up period where, normally it's like, 3 months, everyone's still living there. So it's a different, it's just really different, I'm finding, to lease up large projects. And it's different even on 100%, 60% project, but when you're trying to do this and overlay it with the population that this rental assistance is aiming to serve, it's just lots of lessons learned, and I think really speaks to Anne's point about it's really incumbent to think about how do we negotiate our LOIs with our financing partners to answer to some of these things that could happen in the long run. Anything else from folks? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it is, the services funding is technically renewed every 2 years via the legislature, but it is part of the current service level budget. So our understanding is that it's not going through kind of, we don't have to argue for it each year. It's, moved forward pretty quickly. Of course, I think there is a concern that, leadership can change, governments can change, priorities can change, and that's always on the table. And the way that we've structured a lot of these projects is that we've set them up so if that funding, hopefully it never goes away, but if it does, they can move to just standard 60 MI affordable housing without the PSH requirement. So that wouldn't obviously be ideal, but that would be our approach to supporting those projects if that unfortunate event happens.
And Dana, can you just repeat the question too for the
Sure.
people at home?
The question was, is it a concern or is there risk involved if the legislature, removes the funding if it has to be renewed every 2 years for the services and rental assistance contract for PSH?
Thank you.
Yeah, this is from the lender perspective. As the way that the budget is proposed, like you said, is, it's easier to get it through. So NOAA as a mission-driven organization has a larger appetite for risk for this kind of thing. So, definitely if you're going with a banking institution for your permanent debt, check early that they are on board with the situation. But NOAA's perspective is we are counting on it being available for at least the term of our loan. And if it's not available, there's going to be a big problem. So we're all going to work together to solve it.
And did you have anything to add to that?
For a long time, investors were uncomfortable with project-based Section 8. And recently, we've all become very comfortable with annual appropriations risk at the federal level. It's become kind of a by right. And I think that the OHCS funding is similar since it's general funds. And we would look at it that way, that it's going to be renewed, but it does speak to the importance of advocacy by all of us and getting those legislators out to the projects to see the impact that they're making in the community and saying, we need this, we need you to renew this, we need you to be a supporter of affordable housing.
So drawing some lines here from this one program that is passed through the legislature versus voter approved. It seems like from a financing partner perspective that voter approved rental assistance is just inherently riskier and harder to underwrite.
I'll add to that and say that we had at least one major potential lender and investor on our Merrillhurst project come to us and say, we can't be part of this deal. We just can't get comfortable with this source of a voter approved levy. So I think it just depends on who you're talking to, and that was a line in the sand that they couldn't get comfortable with. So I think there is my perception from that experience, which was I was pretty surprised by that, considering the projected revenue that the program has. But I think at least some institutions will take a pretty risk-averse approach to voter-approved levies.
I wonder, Chris, if that will shift at all now, because that was very early on in the project before any revenue was collected, and maybe now that revenue is being collected, I believe, that might help. But it's still got that the outer sunset date, which is the real issue. Yes. Thank you. Mhm. Uh-huh. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think one of the things that exists is this PSH Institute, but I'm not sure if you guys can speak to, I mean, has it been, so has it, I think the question would be, is the PSH Institute pulling in from rural communities, or are the participants predominantly up and down the I-5 corridor?
I think the Institute has reached rural communities pretty well. I mean, we can always do a little better. I think I'm looking at Clayton. He can give me a thumbs up or no, but we had a project in Ontario that just opened, and man, if you look at the list of players that are all part of the funding, the services, the development, the management of that site, it's pretty innovative and inspiring of what they could do out in Ontario. And I think the Institute, that team went through the Institute. I'm also looking at some of my colleagues who are working on capacity building, and I know that rural capacity and PSH is definitely, like, we're having a lot of conversation around that, and is a more focused institute, maybe a little more intensive on the capacity building around development and planning, and that's something that we're thinking about for sure. Yeah, it is project specific, and the team has to have a developer, service provider, property manager, and then ideally someone with lived experience, and maybe an architect or someone from the region's governmental leadership. But it is based on a project concept, and that concept can grow and change, but it is what you're workshopping through the Institute.
Yeah, I think that Sequoia Crossings project evolved significantly throughout the Institute. And we have another project in the office with NEA that also went through the Institute, and what that project looks like today relative to what they said their concept was when they applied to the Institute is drastically different. So the way I look at the Institute is that you come with a concept, and through working with your team and the support of Corporation for Supportive Housing and OHCS, the outcome is a more refined project. Mm. Yeah, yeah. And happy to talk to you as well. I mean, Housing Development Center does consulting across the state. So, yeah. Oh, sure. I'm failing on that one. So the question was about technical assistance or support that the industry can provide to rural developers, because they're often, I'm making some assumptions here, you don't have a lot of staff, maybe not as experienced with development, but clearly a large priority right now. We're hearing that, from our funders, that rural communities are a priority. So how to make that work? What resources are available? Yes. So another resource to access the acronym again, CCRH. Okay, and it's based in California, but it's a specific training. Okay. Okay, they're planning an institute for up and down the West Coast, Washington, Oregon, and California, specifically targeting rural developers. Yeah, and I know that, is Kimmy A here? Oh, there you are. Okay. So Kimmy A is with OHCS, and her focus there is on capacity building. And I know I went to grad school at Berkeley, and I'm a product of becoming a developer through the Cal Berkeley program and fellows program for early young project managers. And I know that at HDC, we've talked a lot to Kimmy A about this concept about, how important, in my opinion, that model in California is and how we can bring it here. And Tracy Manning, executive director at HDC, is actually doing a session on this topic. And Travis, do you remember when it is? Hopefully not right now. But it's called Building the Bench. You can look in your little books. Yeah. 1:15. So you could go have a little lunch and then go hear about how we're going to build the next generation, because I know I'm wanting to retire in about 5 to 7 years. So I feel like we've got a big task before us. So anything else to kind of close us out? Yeah. That's a good question. I don't know.
Yes.
I think you have to know who you're serving, and you have to manage the narrative really carefully. This project we're doing in Lake Oswego is pursuing population B, which is at risk or on the verge of homeless. That is not what people think of when they hear homeless or permanent supportive housing, typically, right? So understanding that and leading with that, and understanding that it's a portion of the units, not all of them, really starting from like the very beginning with managing your narrative, it is the most important thing. And repeating the phrase over and over again when people ask you questions. I've heard myself say it so many times, I'm sick of it. The phrase, "that has not been our experience," has come out of my mouth so many times. And I think probably lots of other people can relate to that. So it's a lot of managing the narrative and thinking it through way from the beginning, and just sticking to it and reiterating it over and over again.
Yeah, and I think that we should all be celebrating, because in Clackamas County right now, there are 2 projects under construction that have PSH, one in the city of Happy Valley at Travis's former employer's project, Catholic Charities, and this project, Marylhurst Commons. And that, to have 2 projects under construction in both of those jurisdictions, is really forward movement on this question, in my opinion. And thank you, Devin. Oh, yeah. That's Devin's project. So, yeah. And I don't know if that one has any affordable housing. Is there much affordable housing there prior? No. So, I mean, that's huge, you guys. Hands. Congratulations. Yeah. Well, thank you to all of our presenters and for being my co-partners and having this idea and wanting to turn it into a session. And thank you for attending and enjoy the conference. And it's so wonderful to see everybody in real life.